Hello, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Welcome. We just wanted to start by acknowledging the fact that we're situated on traditional territories. These include the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississauga of New Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. The treaty we signed for this particular parcel of land is collectively referred to as the Toronto Purchase and applies to lands east of Browns Line to Woodbine Avenue, north to Newmarket. We also want to recognize the enduring presence of Aboriginal people on this land. So tonight is historic. It's the first time in Ontario's history that a public autism supports discussion will take place with provincial leaders at this level, so close to an election. Thanks to the advocacy efforts of many of you in this room, the questions we'll explore tonight are front of mind for many of our political representatives heading into June, and for that you should be proud. My name is Joe McDonald. I'm a volunteer board member at Autism Ontario, and tonight's debate's brought to you in partnership, we're glad to say, between the Ontario Autism Coalition and Autism Ontario. The coalition formed in 2005. It's grown exponentially since to a province-wide force with over 3,000 members. They've organized dozens of rallies and play a key role advocating for our population. Autism Ontario has a 45-year history this year, representing thousands of families and individuals on the spectrum across the province from all corners. We not only work at Queen's Park, but also on the front lines at our 25 chapters. And we want to welcome those who are joining us on our live stream tonight. We know there's maybe even more of you given the weather. So our discussants tonight come from each of the main provincial parties and will each, if elected, fingers crossed, in their respective ridings, play a leadership role in whatever government is elected and formed on June 7th. And I'm particularly pleased that we have this slate of candidates because I know that each of them has a really deep understanding of the issues our organizations, both of our organizations, have worked with each of them for a really long time. And I know that firsthand, each of them individually are very passionate, they're well informed, so you're going to get a lot more than just sound bites tonight. So from the Ontario Liberal Party, we have Minister Michael Coteau representing Don Valley East. He's the Minister of Children and Youth Services as well as Community and Social Services. From the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, we have Christine Elliott, candidate for the riding of Newmarket Aurora, former patient ombudsman. For the New Democratic Party, we have Monique Taylor from Hamilton Mountain, critic for Children and Youth Services. And from the Green Party of Ontario, we have Dr. Teresa Punn, a candidate in the Toronto St. Paul's riding. So we want to thank each of you truly for coming tonight. We also want to thank the theater for hosting us. You may have noticed that you slipped in free of charge. That was not an accident. We will be passing around a collection bin as well to try to cover the cost of the rental tonight. As for process, we received over 130 questions online, probably from a lot of you in the audience. So we're going to have the discussants answer all of them. Just kidding. We've selected those that are representative of 8 different themes. And we have audience members with us tonight here in our front row that are going to be posing these questions to the discussants. So as for order, based on a very fair advanced draw, we're starting on this far side with Dr. Punn, and we're going to be moving to Minister Coteau, and each question will shift down one. So Christine Elliott, you'll be second, so that everyone will have an opportunity to answer first and last. So you'll each have 2 minutes to answer your question. There's going to be no rebuttal period to keep things clean. We have a 90-second yellow warning card in front here, and then red means your time's up, and we'll cut your mics after that. So with 75% of our questions received relating to school issues, Laura Kirby-McIntosh is going to kick us off with a question about ABA in the classroom. Laura. We have mics here.
Hi. First of all, on behalf of the Ontario Autism Coalition and our members, thanks so much for agreeing to join us. You guys know that we've fought very hard as an organization against age cutoffs for therapy in the community. As a teacher and as a mom of 2 people on the spectrum, my question is about ABA in schools. If elected, specifically, how will your government ensure that students with autism spectrum disorder have access to the same quality of ABA in classrooms as they have access to currently in the community?
So we'll start with Dr. Punn.
Thank you for that question. Perfect, it works. So that would be a two-pronged approach. So number one, we don't have enough educational assistants in the classrooms. And again, I almost feel like I'm talking to people who know so much more about this than I do. But number one, we don't have enough educational assistants. Number two, the ones we do have, they may not necessarily have the appropriate training. If you go on the government's website, they say there's like a voluntary slide deck for some of these EAs to go through. Voluntary means we ain't going to pay for it. We don't care if you've read it. Maybe get a monkey to click through it and then press submit. That is not acceptable. We have to treat our EAs fairly. We need more of them, and we get more by paying them a better wage. What they're doing is they're keeping these kids educated. They're keeping them in the classroom. They're increasing their chances of living an adult life without going on ODSP, which they don't need to be on, but they're forced to because that's what the system makes them do. So again, pretty basic, we need more EAs, and you get them by, again, paying them a higher wage. That's how you attract higher quality people. Number three, you also pay them to undergo the training that apparently the government thinks is so important that they've made a slide deck, but they're not willing to enforce it. Merci.
Well, thank you very much for the question, Laura, and it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you tonight for this really important discussion. A lot has been said about putting more educational resources into schools, but I know there's a lot of concern about not having enough specialized training in ABA. It is a very specialized way of training, and I think it needs to start in our colleges and universities with teachers as they're preparing to teach in the classroom, understanding that not every child is the same, and some students need a specialized way of being taught. So ABA is really important, but it's also important for everybody that interacts with the child. Depending on what they do, that will require a certain level of assistance, whether it's an EA, whether it's the lunchroom supervisor, whether it's the custodian. Everybody needs to know about ABA to some degree. I certainly do agree that we need more EAs in the classroom. I know that's a huge frustration for everyone, for parents, for students, and for teachers. We need more supports there so that those students can receive the specialized help that they need in the classroom in order to be successful. We also need to make sure that every child that needs an IPRC at school gets one. I know that some school boards sadly have been discouraging families from proceeding with an IPRC. It's really important to have that done so that the child can receive the students or the separate services and supports that they're entitled to. I'm also in favor of allowing independent service providers, whoever is working with the child, as well as for children's community treatment centers to be able to come in if they've been working with the child before they started school. I think that's really important because that's a really broken transition there that somebody might get used to a certain type of provision. When they hit school age, that is broken, and then they have to start off as somebody else in the classroom. So we need to make sure that we provide all of the people with the supports that they need. And we need to make sure as well that there's a meaningful transition plan once students finish high school before they go off, instead of just saying, here's your application for ODSP. We need to make sure that parents and the students have the opportunity to work with the guidance counselors to develop a program for the rest of their life so they don't end up just sitting in their parents' homes watching TV. They deserve to have a rich and happy life like everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that very important question, and thank you very much for putting this on tonight so we have the opportunity to be able to talk about what our parties would do differently moving forward. You know, in the New Democrats, we have been talking about these situations for quite some time. We know that we need more special education assistants within our classrooms, and make sure that they're paid appropriately so that we can retain them, and make sure that they have proper training. We talk about ABA in the classrooms. Well, currently that is such a watered down approach that the teachers don't have the resources to be able to do that. So we need to ensure that when teachers are going through the Teachers College, that this is a stable part of their program so that they learn how to teach our kids with special needs. You know, when the government brought in the new programming and allowing outside providers to come into the classroom, I thought it was a great approach. But then they talked about segregation and taking those kids out of a classroom and putting them into a special area. I don't think that's how we should be moving forward. We need to ensure that the services are happening in the classroom so that all kids understand and benefit from that process, so that it's not, oh, that kid's gone from class, we can relax now and we can get to learning. No, we need to understand and learn from the beginning as young children that people learn at different rates and with different needs. So we ensure that, that it's a learning process right across through the classroom. The funding formula needs to be overhauled. We need to make sure that we have a new funding formula to ensure that the needs of children are met and that it is based on that child's needs. So with the current funding formula, we see I don't know if she lifted a card or if she just moved around. I seen a yellow flash. With the current funding formula, we're seeing kids pretty much being babysat in the schools, and I hear that from parents directly, that their education is more about a glorified babysitter and controlling behaviors rather than teaching them how to read, teaching them basic math skills. Those are the important fundamentals of our education system, and we need to ensure that every child has the ability to meet their full potential, and we can only do that by ensuring...
That's time. Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, maybe in the middle is better. Yeah, no, I agree.
Thank you very much. I want to start by saying thank you to all of the organizers for having this event tonight. And thank you to Laura for the question. I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of parents across the province and advocates and organizations, and this issue is probably, besides the direct funding piece, is probably one of the key issues that continues to come up. It's something that I committed to looking at once we would stabilize the first step, and I think that was overhauling the system and looking for consistency and building confidence into the system to eliminate that wait list. We're at a stage right now where I think we can go forward with that transition conversation. I know that we have demonstration classes that are taking place across the province as we speak. I also know that this is something that we'll speak to, specifically this issue in our platform. My first opportunity to work with children in our schools with autism was back roughly about 10 years ago when I was responsible for the first demonstration class for integrated ABA at the Toronto District School Board. I worked with parents to get that done. We've built a table, a community table, I believe, over the last 2 years where we have the right players at the table. It's the opportunity for us now to move forward and to continue to build on the momentum that we've gained over the last 2 years. And we couldn't have done it, I think, without everyone here in the room and parents across this province. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks to all of our discussants for that first question. Then we're going to move on to a second.
Now we'll hear from Kara Broth-Zoros with a question about regulation.
It's actually Nancy Marchese. I'm standing in for Kara Beth. Hi, everyone. I am a clinician. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst and also a psychologist. And I've had the great honor and opportunity to work with kids with autism for almost 20 years now. And so this question is very near and dear to my heart. My question is about regulation. Given the government's investment in ABA services across numerous sectors and across the lifespan, what are your plans to ensure children, youth, and adults with ASD and their families are protected and have a mechanism for voicing their concerns regarding ABA service providers? Do you support regulation of ABA service providers?
And
Well, I think it's really important that we make sure that all the service providers out there have the qualifications necessary in order to perform the work that they say that they can do. I know that there are many parents out there that are really looking for answers. They're looking for services for their children, and we want to make sure that promises aren't made to people that can't be kept. And I know that happens with some service providers, a very small number of them, but it is so important, especially at a young age, for children to receive the services that they need, particularly IBI, because while it's helpful to almost everyone, it is more beneficial, of course, to younger children before the age of 6. So you really want to make sure that whoever the service providers are have those necessary qualifications and that they are doing the work that they say that they can do. So I think regulation in terms of making sure it's the association and groups of people are professionalized, making sure that they can manage their own members, making sure that certain regulations are being kept and rules and requirements is really, really important to make sure that service provision is consistent across the province and to make sure that parents and families and individuals with ASD are receiving the services that they need and deserve.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for that question. Absolutely. We need to ensure that we have accountability and transparency in the system. We need to make sure that families are getting what they're paying for and that they're paying a reasonable price. And by ensuring that they're regulated, we'll put those measures in place and making sure that we have oversight over providers to make sure that families are getting exactly that they're paying for and that their children are in a safe environment with someone who they know that can be trusted. You know, they're very vulnerable children. Our children are vulnerable kids, and we need to make sure that their space is safe and that that the person who is providing the training has the proper qualifications and education to do just what they're being asked to do. Families have enough on their plate. First, trying to navigate systems, trying to figure out where the services are available. We need to make sure that when they find those services that they can be trusted without putting more grief on families.
Thank you very much. So the answer is yes. In fact, earlier this year I brought forward an announcement to the public saying that we've started the process working with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care to start the process of regulation. So it'd be going through the Minister of Health. In addition to that, we are going forward with and we've actually done this earlier this year, putting together a list of we've put a screening process for providers. So when you go and actually look for a provider, that there's some type of process that's filtered those providers. And the other piece that we're doing is we put in place a new independent clinical review process to make sure that when families are not satisfied with the process and the delivery of service, that there's a formal process that kicks in to ensure accountability.
All right.
So the answer is yes. Can everyone hear me? And so, again, you're a psychologist, I'm a physician. The key thing about regulation that hasn't been talked about yet, because everyone is completely on the ball with this, is that you also need to focus on continuing education. So right now, we know what we know now about the ASD spectrum. There is so much more research going on. The public awareness is key right now, and that momentum is going to bring better and better techniques. So part of that regulation requires that the providers, number one, they meet the basic requirements for what we know now. And two, we have a strategy in place to ensure that they meet continuing education requirements, to make sure that, again, going forward, that this program will take care of your children, our children, 10 years from now and 20 years from now. Thank you.
Next we have Misha von Spiek addressing the Ontario Ombudsman's report and the next steps.
Hello, yes. An autistic person needs both support and case management over the course of a lifetime. Right now, services are divided and inconsistent and difficult to access. Transitions set you back in time and force you to start over again. What does your party plan to do better to coordinate services for adults?
Thank you. Well, we will start by families not having to reapply once they turn 18 for their funding. That is first and foremost. We all know that autism doesn't end at 5, but we also have to make sure that autism doesn't end at 18 either. And so that is a major part of our platform to ensure that that services continue. The wait list for Passport, I mean, we're still seeing years of wait list for young people, for families, housing wait lists. These are the kinds of things that we've seen in the Ombudsman's report. He made over 60 recommendations, and the government's been sitting on this report, and we're still seeing wait lists after wait lists continuing to happen, and families struggling, not getting what they need. We see it in papers daily of families who are waiting, who are struggling. We see families who are leaving their young people, I don't want to call them their children, their young adults in ministry offices because they're frustrated. They don't know where they're going to turn next. And so we have so much work to do to ensure that our young adults, as they're looking into the future of moving into the community themselves, that they have the supports necessary for them, and ensure that services continue to be there regardless of how old they are, because at different parts in your life you need different services to deal with the different things that are happening in any life, right? So ensuring that there's always services available for folks when they need it is critically important.
Thank you very much. The Ombudsman made 60 recommendations. So far, there's 57 recommendations that the government is working on or has completed. I was at the flag raising a couple of weeks ago for autism, and the Ombudsman was very clear. He actually said that the Ontario government has moved forward with his report, and he was happy with the progress that we've made. I think we've come a long way in the last 2 years. In regards to transitioning from one system to the next, I don't know how you wouldn't have some form of application process, because we're talking about two different types of services. One is, ABA therapy, and one is like living expenses, etc. There has to be a transition, but what we need to do is we need to start that process well before the person turns 18 or 21, depending on their needs. But that's where we've put in place these family advisors that are going to be able to work with families and that young person at an early age, and they'll be able to work with them throughout different transitions. Not only transitioning from the youth to adult system, but looking for things like employment, looking for external programming, things like that. We have to find ways to allow for transition in many different areas, and that's something that we've committed to.
And while I understand that the two programs have a different focus, I think we again need to borrow a bit from the medical world. So for example, there are a slew of, very dangerous congenital cardiac conditions that before, these patients unfortunately did not transition to adulthood. But now many of them do. So, same issue. How do you transition? So number one, you identify the provider before the patient turns 18, well before. Because these patients, again, they have different needs. They are not just going to be plopped into a new setting and say, hey, you want to fill out a job application? This takes time. You need to build rapport, you need to build trust, and that's what we're missing now. We need that gateway person in the adult system who develops a relationship with the patient while they're still technically under 18. They then work together, and then they can make that transition in a way that is individualized and makes sense for that individual case.
The Ontario Ombudsman's report, Nowhere to Turn, really depicts a pretty stark picture of the services, or should I say lack of services, for people with autism spectrum disorder in Ontario. It demonstrates the many, many gaps that still exist. And sadly, while some work is being done, there still is a lot of work that needs to continue to happen. And I think it does start in high school. It starts with working with the person with ASD and their family, first of all, to determine what they want. They have a right to determine their own independence and autonomy as much as possible, and we should be fostering that. We need to work with them and with their family to determine what their future needs are going to be and put together the start of a transition plan so that they can get to where they want to be and have a happy and fulfilling life. But then once they finish from school, it has to be more than that. It can't just be, here's your ODSP application. It's, all right, where do you go to from there? Where do you go to for post-secondary education? There aren't very many opportunities out there, as you know. We need more CICE programs, community integration through cooperative education, more disability supports in colleges and universities, more opportunities to get into the workforce with soft skills training, resume writing, interviewing for determining how to interview. All of those things need to happen. But the other thing we need to do, and Monique mentioned it before, is we need to stop this separation and say once you turn 18, then you have to stop the Children and Youth Service program and get onto the adult program. There's no need. Autism doesn't stop at age 18. We need to make sure that there's probably a quick check-in to understand what the situation is, but don't stop services. Keep them going. People need them. They don't need to wait that length of time. The situation isn't going to change that dramatically. We need to help them move on to the next stage of their lives, to happy and fulfilling jobs, or if there isn't that available, if they can't do that, at least to have something for them to do in their community where they can be fulfilled. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Cliff McIntosh for a discussion about direct funding.
Hi, my name's Cliff McIntosh. I'm 18 years old and on the spectrum from Thornhill, Ontario. And my question is about direct funding. So, how will your party ensure that families who get to the top of the wait list have free and immediate choice between direct service and direct funding options across the province?
I'm first.
Yes, Minister.
Thank you very much for the question. So we've put in direct funding, and one of the principles that we've put in place is making sure that people have choice when they get to that stage in the wait list. You know, I know that people are going to have to make a decision 35 days from now, but I think people need to remember that for years people have been talking about direct funding, and this year we put it in place. It's the first time it's been put in place at the scale in the province of Ontario. And I want people to remember that, you know, when we talk about the commitments from political parties, and I'm going to talk a bit about the Conservative Party here, that we had a political party here in Ontario that was in power for many years that cut 22% from developmental disability. So when they talk about transition, we need to look at the record of the Conservative Party. We had a past leader that, when had the opportunity to vote on a national autism strategy, voted against it in Ottawa. And we have a current leader that simply says he doesn't care. And I don't believe for one second that Christine Elliott does not care about this issue. I believe she does. But she's part of a political party that, when they're in power, they cut services. They say that they're going to cut $6 billion from the sector currently, or from services, government services, and they mention nothing about autism in their platform. So we need to be very careful. The reason I've addressed this issue, because we've demonstrated that we believe in direct funding. We've done it. The big question now is the Conservative Party going to continue to do this? And if so, how will they demonstrate that? Will it be in their platform? And will their leader actually take back those hurtful words against children here in Ontario?
Now, I understand that there's no rebuttal, but I would kindly implore my fellow candidates that if we could just please answer the question based on our own party's platform. I'm hearing that echoed from the audience, and I think that's important. Number 2, yes, direct funding offers people choice, but in the absence of regulations, that choice is scary, and that choice may not get you the services you need. Number 2, the direct funding ain't much. It looks good when you announce it to a layperson who doesn't have to seek out those services. But it's very, very different when you're a parent and you are struggling to make ends meet with all the normal expenses you have, on top of using your, what is it, $8,000? 8 to 10, and again, that doesn't go far, especially in the absence of regulations. You're basically going on, so-and-so maybe is good, I've heard, my doctor recommends so, and they are very, very expensive. But what are you going to do when it's your child on the line? So number 1, we need, if we are to proceed with this direct funding and choice, you have to regulate the profession first, and number 2, it's not enough funding if this is the way the government's going to move forward.
I think it's really important that we do need to talk about the issue at hand, and I can tell you that our party is committed to making sure that children, youth, and adults with autism receive the services and supports that they need. We have committed to $1.9 billion in funding for mental health and addictions, and in some cases, autism can be considered both a developmental situation and a mental health situation. So we have already made that commitment. We've also committed that we would continue the autism program of Ontario, and with the additional $62 million that was recently pledged by the government. So we have made that commitment. We are serious about it. Direct funding is something that I know is very, very important to a lot of families, and many people want it. Some people want the direct service funding because it depends on individual families and what their needs and circumstances are, and where you live in the province, because sometimes there aren't multiple service providers. But for the families that do want direct funding, it should be available across the province, wherever you need it. One of the problems I've heard with that, though, is that in some areas, the service provider is also the one that makes the decisions about whether you can have direct funding or direct service. They're the direct service provider, and they tend to make it very difficult for you to choose direct funding. That is a direct conflict of interest that needs to be removed, and it has to be dealt with straight away so that families can really have the true choice that they're looking for. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Yes, New Democrats will ensure that direct funding is available for families, but I want to be clear. We need to ensure that our public system is fixed so that families are able to utilize it and quite possibly then won't be as quick to jump to direct funding. We have seen families want to have direct funding because the public service was so broken. People weren't feeling that they were getting the fair results that they needed. People were waiting too long. People were having to try to navigate a system that was very broken. With direct funding, it's not going to be, it's hard for some families to be able to do that, and some families just don't have the ability to do that. So yes, we will ensure that direct funding is available, but we will make sure that there's regulations and oversight to be able to manage that. But we need to make sure that we're building up our public services so that families can count on them, and that we do have a system that is fair with proper implementation of who decides what kind of funding it is, as Christine just said, because that's a major problem. So I want to be very clear about that. Families who want direct funding will be able to see that under an NDP government.
Thanks to everyone, and moving along.
Our next question regarding mental health supports comes from Natasha Delaney.
Hello, I'm Natasha Delaney, and I'm from Sudbury. I'm the volunteer chapter president there. I have 2 children on the spectrum, 7 and 8. My question is about mental health supports for people on the spectrum. The mental health system is biased in favor of educated, English-speaking, middle-class families. Autistic people present with complex needs which may service providers can't address. What will you do to ensure diverse populations will be able to access evidence-based mental health and behavioral services?
Thank you for that question. I think a lot of us we have to go back to education. So going back to when I was in medical school, I'll be honest, we had very little training on ASD spectrum. I'm just being honest. It wasn't that long ago. Graduated in 2007 in Toronto, but that was a big issue. They kind of lumped, especially ASD, in with your pediatric rotation, which I'm sure you'll be well aware has a lot of other stuff in it as well. Fast forward to actually going into psychiatry itself. This is where we need to do more in education at that training level to understand, again, that these are patients who are no longer just children. Again, this is a big issue, right? It's same as congenital heart disease. Before, the pediatric psychiatry would focus a bit more, but no, we need a lot more emphasis on training for the adult providers as well. The other thing you mentioned really well is about diversity, and that goes back into who gets into medical school. And you're right, it's ludicrously expensive, so it does favor a certain demographic. And if that certain demographic doesn't spend the time with patients who are diverse, with patients who present with different needs, then they are just simply a little bit incompetent on that end. They're not, they're not ill-intentioned, but again, they are turning off patients who desperately, desperately need their help. And in fact, especially for psychiatry, have probably been waiting a good 8 months, if not longer, for that first visit. And again, with all patients, all with mental health, pediatric, adult, that first encounter, that first impression makes a huge difference. And we do need to focus on, again, education in schools, or medical schools, about compassion, about communication. Because unless you make that first good impression, you have severed a potential relationship that might make huge gains on either end.
Thank you very much for the question, Natasha. And we know that many people, children, youth, and adults with autism also have, in some cases, mental health issues like anxiety and depression and other issues that need to be treated properly. It's a complex diagnosis and complex treatment. So we need to make sure that people have the training that they need in medical school, nursing school, any other health professionals that are dealing with children or adults with autism need to know what they're doing. We also need to have more people trained to be able to provide those services. We know that both people receiving training, psychiatrists, and especially child psychiatrists, it's not really seen as one of the best levels in medicine, perhaps because in some cases the remuneration levels are very low, and I think we need to take a look at those levels because it's difficult, it takes time to deal with mental health issues in any situation, to make sure that you can spend the time that you need to make sure that person gets the care that they deserve. There's also an issue in terms of diversity, especially with Francophone Ontarians. I know particularly receiving mental health treatments, it's hard to get services in your first language. We need to expand that to make sure that people can get the services in their first language to make sure that that service is going to be effective. We also need to make sure that there are other professionals that are able to be involved in providing services. Right now, psychiatrists are covered through OHIP. You can get psychologists, but of course, they're not covered and you have to pay for it separately. And the reality is that many people can't afford that. We need to specifically deal with that issue so that everybody that needs services can get them. We're losing too many young people to suicide. We've got to make it stop and look at all alternatives at this point.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for the question. Mental health is something that we need to be focusing on seriously. That's why New Democrats are committed to creating a dedicated ministry of mental health and addictions so that we can actually focus on mental health and that it's not spread out through ministry over ministry where it's getting lost in the mix. We'll ensure that we hire more mental health workers. 2,200 new mental health workers will be hired to ensure that we can service 28,000 more Ontarians. We're going to build 30,000 supportive housing units, making sure that our young people have somewhere to go where they're supported within our province, because we know that we're waiting years long for those homes. cutting our children's mental health wait. We have 12,000 children on the wait list for mental health in this province right now, and many of those are dual diagnosis, where they're entering into emergency rooms. We've seen the numbers of emergency rooms go up, visits go up, and the support's just not there for families, so we need to make sure that that's there. We'll hire 400 more mental health workers in high schools to ensure that they have supports while they're in high school, and that they have the ability to reach their full potential within that school. If they have the supports in the school for their mental health, they're going to do that much better within the classroom. So New Democrats are very focused on mental health in this election, and we look forward to being the next government and implementing those measures.
Thank you very much. As a government, we've committed $2.1 billion over the next 4 years for mental health. I think it's important that we're able to strike a contrast between what our plan is and what other governments would propose if they were put in place. The Conservative government has said $1.9 billion over 10 years. It just doesn't make sense. We've put in $2.1 billion over 4 years, and if you took the $1.9 billion that the Conservatives have actually put forward as a solution over 10 years, it's actually a cut to the system. Even if you go back the 10 years and you look at the investments we've made, it exceeds the $1.9 billion. So the interesting thing is, when asked about services for autism, you know, Christine went directly to the Mental Health and Addictions Fund as a way to, you know, provide services. That's not where the services for autism comes from. It comes from a dedicated fund that we've put forward as a government, and mental health is a secondary fund. You know, we're investing $17 billion here in the province of Ontario over the next 4 years. It is an historical investment into mental health services, and you know, you only have to look at budgets. You know, I think it was Joe Biden who said, "Show me your budget and I'll show you your priorities." You have to look at the budgets within their platforms, and they'll clearly demonstrate where their priorities are. When you have a platform, you know, the NDP says $580 million over 5 years. It's not enough. The Conservatives say $1.9 billion over 10 years. It's not enough. We need to make the right investments into mental health so young people in this province can get the services they need, and our government's prepared to do that.
Thanks to all of our discussants. These are really hard questions. I think everyone's doing great so far. Yes? So we're more than halfway. We have just 3 more questions left, equally as difficult, so we'll move on.
Next, with a question regarding wait lists, we're going to hear from Sue Walters.
Hi there, my name is Sue Walters. I'm from Aurora, and I have 2 sons, 16 and 14, who are both on the spectrum. My question is about wait lists for the Ontario Autism Program. What are your party's plans for funding the Ontario Autism Program, and how will you reduce the wait lists?
Well, first of all, as I indicated previously, we would continue the support under the Ontario Autism Program, in addition to the mental health and addictions funding, as well as the additional $62 million that was recently promised by the Liberal government. So there is a definite commitment by the Conservatives to continue that, to make sure that services can be provided. But let's face it, the situation right now is the world of autism is loaded with wait lists everywhere you look. It starts from the beginning, where sometimes you can wait up to 4 years to receive the autism diagnosis, which is what you need in order to be able to start receiving services. We then have the wait list for services. Right now there are 21,000 children under 18 waiting for autism services. That's a lot of children still waiting. I don't think the program's going all that well. And we know that IBI, while helpful to everyone, is really useful for children under 6 years old. So we need, the need is urgent. Children need to receive services as soon as they receive that diagnosis, which also needs to be made in a timely manner. We also have a wait list for special services at home. We know that sometimes young people just time out of the wait list before they even get reached. We then have the wait list for the assessment and the transitions. You have a wait list to go from youth services into adult services. It takes time. You have to have a full assessment that nobody wants to go through. It's very taxing for parents as well as for the individual who has to go through it. There's no need for that. And then we have the passport funding, which really gives a lot of people false hope, because you can be eligible for passport funding but may not receive it for years and years and years. And then we have the wait list for housing. 14,000 people still on a wait list for housing that sometimes exceeds 10 years. None of that is acceptable. All of those would be actions that we would take to eliminate the wait list under a progressive Conservative government.
That's time, sorry.
Thank you very much for the question. It was New Democrats who did the Freedom of Information and realized that there was over 16,000 kids on the wait list for services in the province 2 years ago. And that started the Autism Doesn't End at 5, because that was the government's solution to wiping out the wait list. It wasn't that long ago that I was accused of playing politics in the legislature for raising your concerns and your issues when it came to wait lists and services being provided to your children. And so, you know, even though the new program is now newly in place, we're still hearing of families who are waiting years and will be waiting years again for the new programming. Now, that's unacceptable. We need to ensure that families get the services that they need when they need. Christine was right. I mean, first it starts with the assessment. And if you are not going to wait for that assessment for 2 years, you're paying up to $2,000 to be able to get that assessment privately. That's unacceptable. Families should not have to be digging in their pockets just to start out with the assessment, just to be put on another wait list for the services, and then the next wait list for an EA in school, for whichever other programs that your child could possibly need, and then to hit 18. So we're really proud about the fact that you won't have to have that reassessment at 18, and we will already have measures in place so that families can navigate that system. So they're really important issues, and we are determined to make sure that families get what they need. We will create a comprehensive autism strategy to look at all the programming that is currently available in the province, to talk to families, to bring experts together to ensure that all kids, regardless of your diagnosis, get the services they need when they need them.
Thank you very much. So we've put in place a new autism program here in the province of Ontario, and there are many people in the room here that, that have contributed some way to that program through public consultations or sitting directly on our advisory committee to help build it. We had some incredible people co-design this new program. The interesting thing about the new program is the first time, I believe, in Ontario where, you know, the doors were opened in government and advocates, parents, people got to sit at the table and co-design a program with government. So I think the process was a really good process for us to use. We are starting to make gains on the wait list, and we're opening up 16,000 new spots with our funding. The one thing I think people need to keep in mind is that the NDP in their platform says that they would overhaul the entire system. You know, for 2 years, we've sat together as a community to build a new system that I believe is going to work. It's the first time in Ontario that direct funding has been put in place. We've raised the amount from $39 to $55 an hour. We're going to regulate the sector. We're building confidence and consistency within the system. We're putting in more transparency. You know, to go backwards and to elect a government that would actually overhaul the entire system when we've made the gains we've made in the last 2 years are the gains that we've been fighting for the last 20. And I think it's time for us to go forward and continue to talk about those transitions into the education system. It's to invest into research. It's looking at different types of recreational programming, how the municipalities deliver services. There's so much more work to do. But for us to go backwards is going to be a shame for everyone here in this room and young people in the province.
Thank you for the question. And as I'm hearing everyone talk, we all have good ideas, but the bottom line is that there are not enough human bodies to provide the services that your children need. The wait lists are astronomical because it's not a one-stop 5-minute consultation and ta-da, you've had your therapy. So again, when a spot opens up on the wait list, that person needs services for a long time. Again, you're using up that human body. We need, again, a lot more people. We really need to put the money into this. If you're not paying the people, then again, I recommend that we go outside the box and we think of how other industries have been disrupted. Can technology play a role? We do telehealth in rural Ontario. Again, is it perfect? No. Not at all. However, it does give a transition, a bridge to when these other governments are going to come up with a better plan. We do need that stopgap measure in place. So again, telehealth is not the same as seeing a neurosurgeon at Toronto Western Hospital. It isn't. But it is an invaluable screening tool. It provides ongoing support at a distance. It tells patients, hey, you and your parents don't have to skip work, drive 3 hours to come see me at Sick Kids. We can do this on the phone. We can do this through Skype. Technology has given us that. How many of us use FaceTime? So again, we need new ideas in government. I'm not saying we overhaul. I'm just saying that, hey, you need time to magically come up with this money, to magically pay for all these human beings who are expensive and need training. They need time to develop. Let us look at the telehealth and see if we can use that in the meantime to help our patients.
All right, and that's everyone. Thanks very much. So we have 2 more questions left, I believe.
Yes, next we're going to hear a question about employment from Lee McLean.
Good evening, I'm Lee McLean. I'm from London. I'm a retired Army officer, a parent of a 19-year-old young adult with ASD, and co-president of the London chapter for Autism Ontario. My question is about employing people with ASD, and it came to us from an autistic individual. I'm an autistic adult and a college graduate. I've had trouble finding employment, and I have found social services workshops inaccessible. How does your party plan to support autistic adults secure and maintain employment?
So one thing we need to bring back is the co-op option. So a while ago, the co-op option was actually relegated to, oh, for those of you with ASD in colleges, in universities, just use those services to help you get a job. And number one, that question was from a college student. So those services are not sufficient because those services are not dedicated to patients with ASD. They're not specially trained. They're the normal people who help every other college student try to find his or her way in this world. We need to focus more on bringing back co-op placements and having government support for that. We do, because what would the government rather pay for? Disability for life? Or would they rather pay for a few co-op placements where patients with ASD, human beings with skills, with talents, with motivation, can actually earn a living? They are capable of doing that. Do they need a little help? Yes. But that help is worth far more than the paltry disability handouts that only keep them under the poverty line for the rest of time.
Well, the sad situation is that when most young people leave school, often at age 21, they're simply handed their ODSP application and say good luck to you. It's like they fall off a cliff and they end up watching television in their parents' homes, and often a parent may have to quit work because someone needs to stay home with that young person. That needs to change in a number of different ways. One has to be, it has to start in high school, working with that young person to determine what they want to do, what is their life goal, working with them and their parents to develop that transition plan so that when they leave school, they have a plan in mind and it's not just left to chance as to what they're going to do. We need to make sure that there are employment opportunities and post-secondary educational opportunities. But I think it really starts with leadership. It has to start at the top. It has to start with government showing the way, working with employers, dispelling a lot of the myths that exist out there about hiring people with ASD, the fact that a lot of people think it's going to cost them more money, a lot of money, or it's going to lead to potential employment disruptions. None of that's the case. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Mark Wafer, who has hired people with a variety of disabilities in his work at Tim Hortons over the years. If you fit the right person with the right job, it's not a charitable act. It's a good business opportunity, and people deserve to have the chance to get involved in the workforce like everybody else, because that is how I believe we're going to move to full inclusion. Everybody wants to feel that they're needed and can make a contribution, and everyone can in different ways. And we need to give people that opportunity for work. We need to make sure there's more post-secondary opportunities like CICE. We need to make sure we give more soft skills training to students when they're still in high school. And we need to make sure that they have the opportunity and the government puts its money where its mouth is and starts hiring people with disabilities as well, including individuals with autism and other special needs. That's the way we do it. It has to start with that real leadership at the top.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this really important question. Absolutely, part of our platform is incorporating co-op into our school process so that we can ensure that young people have a better way into and access into the workforce. And we need to do that by ensuring that people have proper supports, that people are given the proper skills and proper training to be able to work through those processes, making sure that they have resume opportunities, making sure that they're taught soft skills, that they're taught social skills, that they're matched up with a job placement that makes sense for them. Not everybody can do the same type of job, so we need to ensure that the supports are in place for each individual person to be able to focus on the place where they choose to take the rest of their life and what place they would like to work in. We will, when it comes to ODSP, some people will still need to ensure that they have the ODSP available to them. Not everybody will be able to, make a full living in life without the financial supports. So we will also commit to the government's budget proposal in making sure that we move the $200 allotment right now to $400 a month that they're able to keep, to give them the proper opportunity to make that extra and to do better in life instead of keeping people in poverty. We'll also increase our ODSP rates by 5% annually to take folks with disabilities out of poverty and still allow them to have that employment opportunity. So making sure that they have training skills, they have co-op opportunities, and that they have people to support them in the workplace is absolutely critical.
Thank you very much. When I speak to parents, and I've spoken to many parents across the province, they always say to me, what's going to happen when I'm not here? And it's a big obvious concern. But it brings on a lot of anxiety, not knowing what the future looks like. And I think by making sure that young people can get the type of training to find a career path is so essential for young people. I had the opportunity to go to a community living center in Scarborough, and I met a young man, Sam, who does some public relations there. He was featured, he did this video of him working at Starbucks. He went on to Ellen, and he had millions of hits. And talking to him about the opportunity to work and find work that he was passionate about, it would transformed his complete life. We have pilot projects that we're currently engaged on, 5 across the province for employment. I went to a autism workshop for job employment, and there was a job fair a couple of weeks ago called Spectrum that I committed to working with the leaders to bring right across the province of Ontario. And you know, we're going to commit to programs like the basic income to look for ways to build a stronger safety net out there for people. But Christine said something interesting. She said it starts at leadership. And you know, I believe that 100%. And I just want people to realize that, you know, again, and I think this is an important piece, the leader of the Conservative Party said he wouldn't even want kids with autism living in his neighborhood. How do you expect a leader like that to find jobs for your kids? No one expects that. So leadership does matter. It's important the words we use, the tone we take, the approach we take, and it says a lot. And just remember, when you go out there and you go to vote, you have a leader of the Conservative Party that doesn't want your kids even living in his very neighborhood. He should be ashamed of himself.
All right, so that's the end of that question. I think we have just one more.
Yep. Next, we're going to hear from Dermont Cleary with a question regarding housing.
Good evening. Thank you for taking my question. I'm Dermot Cleary. I'm the chair of Autism Canada. My question tonight is, and many of us in the room will be familiar with this subject, 4 years ago, the All-Party Select Committee on Developmental Services, co-chaired by yourself, Ms. Elliott, delivered a report which clearly articulated the challenges experienced by persons with developmental disabilities and their families. This report made a number of key recommendations, including innovative housing solutions for people with developmental disabilities. As you're aware, 1 in 66 Ontarians are on the spectrum. And in addition, their families are still waiting for solutions to significantly resolve this housing crisis. I believe the mention was made tonight of 10-year plus wait list for over 15,000. Is that right currently? It's shameful. My question, given the announcement yesterday of $19.2 billion, what do you see as the path forward on this serious issue?
Thank you very much for this very important question, because you're absolutely right. We currently have over 15,000 people with developmental disabilities on wait lists for housing in this province. And we have a government that has allowed this to get out of control, and the Conservative government years before that, without properly investing into our young people. So this needs to stop. We have heard of inappropriate housing. We are seeing our young people in hospitals. We're seeing young people in long-term care facilities. We're seeing them in illegal group homes. It's just completely unacceptable, and something that we are completely committed to. We will invest in 30,000 new supportive housing units over the next 2 years. So that'll be about 3,000 every year to work on the wait list. We will invest $228 million per year in capital funding, plus operating funding that increases to about $50 million per year. We have heard what the Conservative leader has said on this file, and it is concerning. We know that if there's a premier in this province who doesn't think that people with autism should be living in a community, then how is it that his government is going to ensure that there's a strategy to ensure that we have proper housing for young people? We have the Liberals who have been there for 15 years and have allowed these lists to get completely out of control. We have 88-year-old moms who are at home with 2 adult children on the spectrum, 158, 164. This is a story I was told. And she has no idea what's going to happen the day that she's gone. Who's going to be there to take care of her children without these proper housing supports? It isn't a new story. It's a story that's been going on for years, but we're committed to making sure that we correct it.
Thank you. We know that in the last 15 years, we've seen the number of demands within the system for housing completely expand in this province. We have more people now who have mental health challenges. We've seen the autism rates going from, back in 2000 from 1 in 170, I believe, to 1 in the mid-60s today. We're seeing a complete shift in the system, and we need to be more responsive to the system and build more homes. And we have made an announcement that we will develop more homes, but it's not just up to government. I think that we need to leverage, things like inclusionary zoning to put in place measures to ensure that when homes are being built and places are being developed, that they take into consider affordable housing. We need to use tools like in the City of Toronto, Section 37, municipal rules to say 5% of all the property that's being developed has to include a certain category of housing that will be completely dedicated to adults with developmental disabilities. I think people want to be kind and work with community. Developers, I think people want to be, to build a better community around us. We just need to put in place a strategy that works with government, that works with the private sector, that works with government regulation, that works with municipal governments, to build better housing overall to meet the needs that we have today.
So again, I see this as a terrible tragedy, but also an opportunity to disrupt what we currently think of as housing. People just think, again, they're thinking of essentially a retirement home for patients on the spectrum. That is literally what it boils down to. It's unattractive, and that is literally what it is. I say we change that model. We have people on the spectrum who are looking for jobs, who are looking for leisure and activities and hobbies. We also have those same people looking for housing. We cannot think of just building housing units, which is, again, nothing more than a sad retirement home. We need to think of these as vibrant spaces that your neighborhood will want to have. You have to, again, this is 2018, you have to make it sexy, you have to make it attractive. You have a bowling alley, and the bowling alley, who is it run by? People on the spectrum. Again, certainly shouldn't discriminate against people not on the spectrum, but again, the idea that these are spaces, these can be vital communities that can generate revenue. So here's the other issue, and I'm glad Monique brought it up. You can't just pay for the real estate. You have to pay to keep that building operational. And again, are you just going to keep throwing money down? Does this government have that much money? How much debt do we want to go into? You have to, again, think outside the box and come up with housing solutions that incorporate a revenue stream that can be maintained by the people who live there.
Well, there are many important issues in autism service provision, but I would say that the issue of housing is one of the most important and certainly one of the most emotional. When I did bring forward the private members bill that resulted in the Select Committee on Developmental Services several years ago in the legislature, people would cry when they would come before the committee because they were so worried about what was going to happen to their adult son or daughter when they were no longer around. And these are parents in their 80s that are taking care of 50, 60-year-old still children, still requiring their services. And what happens, as you probably know, is that it's an emergency placement, that they don't get a placement until all of a sudden a parent dies, and then they get a placement. Whether it's an appropriate placement or not, it's a placement, and that young person is all of a sudden thrust into a new home, new circumstances, living with strangers. That's not good for anybody. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we need to work with the individual and family, have someone help them plan what their needs are going to be, because across their spectrum, there's many individuals that can live more or less on their own with somebody checking into them, to others at the other end of the spectrum that need 24/7 supervision in a supervised group home. Every person is different. Their needs are different. So we need to determine that we have those services and supports available in communities across the province to meet their needs. We also need to make sure that we are flexible in terms of housing opportunities in the future. One size doesn't fit all. I know that there are some people in the ministry that will say anything that allows for more than 4 people living in a group home is not adequate. People are coming up with their own solutions. Sometimes it's more than 4 people. So we need to be flexible, and we need to listen to what people actually want in their communities. And finally, we need to help to transition that young person into another housing placement while their parents are still alive, so they can help with that transition and make sure that when that time comes, the person is going to feel comfortable in their new home, and that it can happen without those transitions that are so difficult for people who have a lot of difficulty adapting to change. Thank you.
Okay, well, that wraps up our 8 questions. So obviously we covered a lot of ground tonight. For those of you who didn't have your questions asked or answered, I understand we're going to be relaying all of the questions that we received in some form to the participants tonight. So obviously, these are complex issues. Don't lend themselves to sound bites, and I think that, like I promised, we got much more than that tonight. These are issues that require really a whole-of-government approach, right? And it's nice to see that we're thinking and talking about autism over the lifespan. What strikes me is that everyone on the stage really was able to speak to the issues intelligently. And I think, again, that goes back to the advocacy of a lot of people in this room and the awareness that we've raised over the last number of years and decades. So what gives me hope is that regardless of where these people end up on June 8th, I know that they'll all remain engaged political citizens, and they will continue to speak out for our cause alongside. So thanks to our discussants tonight. And finally, just a thank you to Ontario Autism Coalition. It's been really great to partner with you tonight, and I hope this is a partnership that we can continue going forward. So thank you. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good night.